I know that when you were in this position, and 5 points nationally ain't nothing, you are desperate for your allies to continue to communicate that you are the underdog, that it is, what was the old expression? I think Dan Rather used to call it tight as a tick, that there is no space for complacency. That said, the polls have to be a very encouraging sign inside the Harris campaign.
Well, the national poll, this particular one, is encouraging, certainly. I especially like the progress she's made on some pretty important issues to most voters, namely the economy, and how her favorability has ticked up. And I also like the enthusiasm that's recorded on her side of the equation. But having said that, national polls don't matter. Battleground state polls matter, and there's 7 of them. And just today, the same people that did this national poll pointed out that Trump is in a much better position in Arizona than she is, that Trump appears to be in a somewhat better position in Georgia than she is, that North Carolina is essentially tied. So we've got, and if you look at all of battleground states, if you add in Nevada and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, these are all margin of error races. We got 6 weeks. This is no time to go, oh, woof, we got this done. This is a time where the candidate and the campaign is desperately wanting people to stay engaged, enthusiastic, calling their friends in other states that are battleground states, doing whatever they can to help, volunteering, and making sure that those registered voters become likely voters on Harris's side of the equation.
Well, and Claire, that the likely voters are become Harris voters, right? It's both.
It's both.
It's turning out the low propensity voters to turn them into voters, and that's usually a lot of young voters, right, who may have gone off to college since they were paying attention over the summer, making sure they're registered where they're going to be in November, and then doing that final bit of persuasion. I want to show you, Claire, how our friend and colleague Steph Rule made an argument very effectively with someone who describes himself as undecided.
It's not too much to ask Kamala, say, are you for a Palestinian state if Hamas is going to run that state?
Okay.
Yes or no?
And let's say you don't like her answer. Are you going to vote for Donald Trump?
No, I'm not.
Kamala
I just said I'm not going to vote for her.
Harris is not running for perfect. She's running against Trump. We have 2 choices. And so there are some things you might not know her answer to. And in 2024, unlike 2016 for a lot of the American people, we know exactly what Trump will do, who he is, and the kind of threat he is to democracy.
I don't know.
So it's unclear to me how there could be an informed...
The problem that a lot of people have with Kamala is we don't know her answer to anything, okay?
But you know
and
his answer to everything.
And that's why I would never vote for him, and people shouldn't vote for him. But people also are expected to have some idea of what the program is of the person you're supposed to vote for. You're just not supposed to say, well, you have to vote for Y because X is this, that, and the other. Let's find out a little bit more. And I don't think it's a lot to ask her to sit down for a real interview as opposed to a puff piece in which she describes like her feelings of growing up in Oakland with nice lawns.
Then I would just say to that, when you move to Nirvana, give me your real estate broker's number and I'll be your next door neighbor. We don't live there.
You know, Claire, at some point, Dick Cheney knows enough about what Kamala Harris's policies are, and I know him pretty well. He cares a lot about national security policy. Liz Cheney cares an awful lot about national security policy. She knows enough about what Kamala Harris's policies are. So do Adam Kinzinger and Jeff Duncan, and lifelong Republican and McCain ally Mayor Giles of Arizona. I mean, this to me doesn't feel like it's about what people like that say it's about.
Yeah, listen, I think Kamala Harris has been in public life for a long time. Kamala Harris has set out her positions on some very important issues like housing and affordability issues and food and groceries. She certainly has stated her policies on how important the climate change issue is. And by the way, she has been very clear about what her position is in reproductive health freedom, whereas does Bret Stephens, does that guy know what Trump is going to do on that issue? He changes every 10 minutes on what he's saying about how he will treat women's essential freedom in terms of controlling her own body. And that's the other thing. You know, it just drives me crazy, these Republicans saying, well, it's his policies. He can't put 3 sentences together about his policies. He gets a question about manufacturing in Michigan, and he goes on 10 minutes about countries that have a nuclear weapon. It's like, what? I mean, he isn't cogent about his policies, and I'm not sure these people even know what his policies are. All I know about his foreign policy is he loves dictators. That's all I know.
Well, and David Jolly, Bret Stephens cares a lot about foreign policy. There's not a single person who saw Donald Trump in the sit room who's voting for him again. There's not a single person who saw Donald Trump in the tank briefings where the Pentagon briefed him on operations and crises who's voting for him again. Former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, gave a fiery speech saying that in America we don't swear an oath to a king or a dictator. We pledge an oath to the Constitution. There is not one person who saw him up close in a military or national. General Kelly, who was his chief of staff, said that he's the, quote, most damaged person he's ever seen in his life. Rex Tillerson, who was his Secretary of State, called him a moron. Bob Corker, Senate former chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, said that the West Wing resembled adult daycare. You find me anyone who thinks that Donald Trump is a good bet on anything related to U.S. national security, and I'll send you a box of donuts.
Nicole, say that all again. So louder, please. That's exactly, I think, the point that Stephanie Ruhle was trying to make in her exchange there, which is we now know Donald Trump's view of the world, his view of the country. We know his leadership. And for many people, they see him as a danger to constitutional order, constitutional norms, and to, frankly, the order on the world stage. And look, I think if I didn't see the entire segment, so if Bret was being critical of Vice President Harris unduly, then he should be criticized. But I do think this is also an area where sometimes it's easy to hold Vice President Harris to a standard of perfection that she can't meet. She's not a perfect candidate. She came into this race 45 days ago. Some of her positions have changed, and there are questions that she hasn't answered. But what we know is the value set she brings to the office, both for domestic policy and her view of the international order, her willingness to protect the constitutional norms, her willingness to protect personal freedoms, her willingness to fight for an opportunity economy for all people. We know her record with the Biden administration, helping lead a post-pandemic recovery that's the envy of the world. We know that the Biden-Harris administration has restored respect for the country on the world stage. Are there questions she hasn't answered? Of course. Of course there are. But to hold her to a standard of perfection, we're failing the real choice test here, which is what Stephanie Ruhle was trying to point out there, which is we know the danger that Donald Trump is. And I think where we see that reflected in the NBC poll, what fascinates me is the first question, are we going in the right direction or wrong direction? 65% of the country says we're going in the wrong direction. It's like 65 to 28 maybe. But the fascinating thing is within that poll, voters see Vice President Harris as the change agent. And she is. There's no faking this. Donald Trump, this is his 3rd time as the major party nominee. We've seen him as president. He's not a change agent. Vice President Harris, this is her 1st time as a presidential nominee who's offering her view of the world. The American people see that as change, and they say that is the change we want, particularly compared with Donald Trump.
Eddie, how do you see the contest and the conversation about the contest?
Well, you know, I thought that Stephanie was engaged in an interesting pedagogical moment with Bret, right? And the question was, okay, if it's the case that she doesn't hold these positions, are you going to vote for Donald Trump? Right? So part of what we see with Bret is that there's this kind of worry that Kamala Harris is going to turn out to be a liberal. Perhaps she is. But does it follow from that fact that you can't not vote for her because your identity is so constituted as a conservative that you're willing to hand over the country to someone like Donald Trump? And that's what she was trying to say to them. You can't make her into you. She's not her policies are not going to be aligned with Project 2025. Her projects are not going to be aligned with moderate Republicans or so. She is who she is, and we can begin to detail that over the course of her career. We can't morph her into something else, but the question for the coalition, the broad coalition, is that she is who she is, and Donald Trump is who he is. Where do you land?
I think the other thing is, for them, it's about them.
Of course. Exactly.
Because there is a voter, I think Mitch McConnell and Bill Barr are the same kind of, and I don't know, I mean, Bret's made clear he's not going to vote for Trump. So Bret Stephens, and I don't want to pick on Bret Stephens, but I do think he gave voice to this thing that's out there. if you care about things like judges or foreign policy, then you must care about the process that appoints judges and confirms them. You must care about the limits of presidential power and of the State Department. And the thing about Trump is that if you care about the things you think you care about, or you go on a TV show and say you care about, Brett was making clear that he wants to understand our positions in the Middle East. It's something he writes about regularly, and I trust that he cares about that deeply. I know he does. If you care about that, what you're saying is, I'm not going to vote for Trump, but I'm not going to help defeat the person who would literally be the political version of Russian roulette when it comes to the issues that I care about most.
Absolutely right. There's nothing that I probably agree with in terms of Liz Cheney, in terms of policy. Probably zero, negative zero in some ways. But she and I agree on the background conditions that allow us to disagree.
Correct.
That's the key.
That's the point.
That's the point. And it seems to me that those persons who are using policy as a proxy for something much deeper, right? There are some folks who believe that if they vote for a Democrat, somehow they've cut against the grain of who they take themselves to be.
Right.
Right. And so part of what we have to do is to unpack what policy is actually, what the demand for policy details is actually standing in.
Well, because, and this comes back to where Claire and I started, and where David, like, it's about making registered voters likely voters. It's about making likely voters Harris voters. It's about people who don't like Trump, but say they care about things deeply, to understand that if you care about things deeply, the only one that keeps us a functioning democracy is Harris. We have so much